All right. So, good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Outstanding. It's so nice to see your wonderful faces, at least in a different orientation in the room. For those of you who weren't with us last night, welcome. So glad your flights either were moved around or whatever. However you got here, we're glad to have you here. For those who don't know, my name is John Gartrell, and I'm the director of the John Hope Franklin Research Center and one of the staffers on the Our Story, Our Terms project here at Duke University. And the gathering that we have before us over the next few days is one of the major objectives of the project grant that we received from the Mellon Foundation to do this work through 2024. And we're all so excited to have everyone here and to be engaged in these, I'm not going to say hope, what will be dynamic, fruitful, deep, and hopefully uplifting conversations amongst a range of voices on a range of topics about movement building and what we have done, are doing, and will do. So just as a few points of orientation, this is primarily for folks who are also going to be moderating the plenaries and the small group discussions that we're going to have throughout the afternoon for the sake of capturing this for the archival record. So for those who don't know, I happen to be an archivist. We're going to try as best as we can to use the one mic that we have in order to capture sound, okay? And it's all right if the spirit moves you and you feel like you need to shout. We have some recorders throughout the room to capture additional sound that is not caught directly on the microphone. But this is going to be our maiden voyage, and we'll make adjustments as we need to go over the next couple of days. But nevertheless, so the way this is going to go for my panelists, and I'm going to introduce you in just a moment, I'm going to talk in the mic, and then I'm going to pass the mic to whoever wants to talk next. Okay? And I don't want y'all looking at me like I'm crazy, like, well, when is John going to pass the mic? I'm just going to pass it. Okay? All right. For those of you who came in, hopefully you received the schedule for the day. It is wonderfully color-coded by our very own Danita Mason Hogans, who is en route and on her way. And so just as a point of order, we're going to have a break. Let's move our break till about 10:15-ish or so, and then we'll pick up the conversation in the later part of the morning around 10:30, from about 10:30 to 12. Does that sound okay to everybody? Okay, great. There are drinks in the room, coffee, soft drinks, and water if you need it. Restrooms, those who might have missed it, is right before you get to the main front desk. And I'm going to give you this prompt now, and before we break, the consent forms, the independent contractor forms, and the W-9 forms that we need from everyone are on the table back there next to the cake, which means we're trying to entice you with cake to complete these forms, because these are the things that we need to make sure that the project is on steady ground, okay? I think that's going to be it for right now. So, our very first plenary session this morning is entitled Who Tells the Story? Making the News and Making History. I have the privilege of being joined this morning by our esteemed panelists. To my two over to the left is Judy Richardson. Y'all know her. Y'all can clap it up. Y'all know Judy. Well, this ain't going to be no boring thing, y'all. I'm not going to be... Okay. To my immediate left is Jess Morales-Raquetto. Next to Judy is Mr. Malou Brooks. And on the far end is Mr. Kafri Abif. And I think, just to kind of give a point of orientation, when we were in the midst of the planning for this specific grant, we had a lot of conversations amongst what we affectionately call our activist council. And one of the things that NSAE said in our conversations that really resonated with me is, how do we tell the story of how we won? Mm-hmm. And I think that is sort of the foundation, or like the prompt that I'm giving us as we go into our conversation this morning. And so I'm going to start off with the very first question, and I'll open it to whoever wants to take it. What do you think is most important for others, so people outside of this work, to understand about the work you have been involved in? Has the portrayal of that work in media and through historical interpretations matched your experience?
Judy said me go, so I'll go. I actually don't know a lot of people in the room, so I'll start by introducing myself. I'm Jessica Ostraketo right now. My job is the Chief of Moonshot Strategies at IGGIS. We work to build Latino political power in the U.S. For many, many years of my career, I was the storyteller at places like National Domestic Workers Alliance and Families Belong Together. But I also now am the co-owner of Latino Media Network, which owns 18 Spanish language radio stations all across the country.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so the reason I say that is now I am the one who gets to decide who tells the stories, which is a big change. A big change and shift. And I've been thinking a lot about this because my job right now at LMN, in addition to being the owner, is Chief Creative Officer. So I'm setting the DNA of our company and the content we create and how we think about the work that we do. And, it's quite a change because, our stations were previously owned by Univision, and many of them were extremely right-wing, or frankly, right now, extremely right-wing. And so we are making a complete shift in what is happening there, which means a complete shift in personnel. It means a complete shift in the stories. And, oh, by the way, it's not a nonprofit, it's a business, and we gotta make a lot of money. A lot. So I'm now at the place where movement and commerce meet up, and frankly, just to acknowledge this, I'm an owner. What? So none of this makes sense to me. So I say all of this because I'm at the moment really grappling with narrative power. And the thing that we talked a lot about when I was at the Domestic Workers Alliance is the different types of power that we have as organizers. Something I always try to remember is our job is to contest for power at all times. So there's narrative power, there's organizing power, there's legislative power, there's economic power, there's cultural power. I now live very firmly in this place of narrative power and even have an ownership over that narrative power. What does that mean for me as a Latina, as a movement leader, as a community organizer, to take that power and use it in service of the movement that I have been helping build for many, many years at this point? One of the things that I really, to be provocative, because we're trying not to be boring, is we're kind of boring, honestly. Organizers are some of the dopest, coolest, most amazing people I've ever met, and we're always boring. We use big words that nobody understands. Thank you. We talk about stuff. I'm I do this as my life's calling and purpose, and I don't want to talk about that. Yeah. That's so terrible. At the same time, I would put Phil Agnew in literally any room and be don't you want to be with this guy? Don't you want to be part of this? You obviously do. The clothes, the attitude, just everything. And I
gotta live with him, Jess.
I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry that I just did that, but I had to. And I could do that, we gotta call Phil out, but I could do that with everybody. I'm these are the coolest, best, most amazing people, but we're not always kind of putting that forward. Yeah. And I don't think it's just about our leaders. I think also it's about our ideas. I don't think we're always putting our ideas forward as the coolest, dopest, best, most accessible things. And so I want the media to cover us better, and I also want us to demand better coverage by giving it to people in a way that can be absorbed and can be igniting and can be, I think a lot about remix, right? It's I constantly want our ideas and our leaders and our words to be remixable. And I think a lot of times we're trying to write the definitive tome as opposed to trying to drop the mixtape and get a lot of remix. So that's kind of my challenge to us. And I think if we do that, he wasn't even in the room when I said that. Okay. If we do that, I think that we will get not only better coverage, and the media is a tool towards the ends that we are actually trying to get at, which is an invitation to people and an acceptance of that invitation to join our struggle. And that is where I really would love our narrative efforts to focus, which is like, what is the best way to issue this invitation to others? You know, as Maurice Mitchell, the head of the Working Families Party, who I know is a friend of many of us, says, organizing is a game of addition and not subtraction. And I think the media is like, you know, the plus sign in that equation if we use it the right way.
I'm sorry. Okay, first of all, that was hot fire. Secondly, I forgot to add one thing. For the structure of the morning, the panel's gonna talk, and y'all can shout out as much as you want to, and then we're gonna have a group discussion after the break. All right, so y'all go ahead.
Well, it's hard to follow that, let me just say, particularly because this is not my favorite time of the morning. Can I just mention that?
Say that.
Hello. So we're going to do our best. Let me talk about, now, you know, I run two tracks. So it's the filmmaking track, but it's also the education track. And so I think about the ways that, particularly SNCC, and I'm just going to focus on SNCC and generally the movement, is framed. And certainly for SNCC, we are mainly seen as demonstrations, right? That's really it. It's the sit-ins, and that's SNCC. Now, we did the same thing. I'll just say, having worked on all 14 hours of Eyes on the Prize, you don't get to Eyes 2 until you see some of the other stuff, right? You don't get the economic development. You don't get the self-defense. You don't. So it's like suddenly you're in whiplash on Eyes 2 when you see Black Power. Well, in fact, SNCC has been talking about this all along. We just don't show it in Eyes, right? And in fact, because of where the camera is and the footage is, and we're working in documentary film, that means that we're using what people took. And those people who took that footage were all just about all white, unless you get to the Black press. So one of the main things that we get that is distorted is the fact that, yes, we started as sit-ins, but then we move, as Charlie often says, to become an organization of organizers. And we're doing grassroots organizing, right? So that when we come in, we're embedding in the community. When Bob Moses talks about you know, going in, trying to get more people, more young people from Mississippi to come to that second meeting of SNCC in 1960, it is AMSI who sits out, puts down a precinct map in Mississippi. And I get this from Bob when he has come to do an advisor meeting for Eyes. I'm on the corner of where his house is. And I say, you know, Bob, I don't remember stuff. He says, oh, I don't remember it either. And then for the next 45 minutes, tells me these stories, right? So one of them is this thing. And he says, you know, I came down, I'm looking for young people. But then AMSI says, look, you young people can talk about sit-ins if you want to. But he says, AMSI, local leader, says, but I know that our power as Black people will be around the right to vote. And then he takes out a precinct map and says, look, I'm not ready for you here where we are, but CC Bryan is ready for you. In other words, I'm not ready with my organization for you here, but CC Bryan is ready for you down in Southwest Mississippi, which is why you get that first voting rights, the first project of SNCC as a grassroots organization in Southwest Mississippi. It's AMSI who gives the idea. So one thing, yes, that we weren't mainly demos after a certain point. And the other thing is that we were group-centered, right? It is consensus. It is, as Diane Nash often talked about, you know, she said, if you're going to put your life on the line, you got to get people, even if they don't agree with the decision that's made, to at least agree to follow it. And that's the way we operated. So, but because it's group-centered, and some in this room understand, I get pissed, when they say it's John Lewis's speech at the March on Washington, okay? Because it was never just John Lewis's speech. It was never, and well, there were a number of people who put their hands on that. But the main thing is, it's how we tell our own story too. That's really important, that you say that it is the SNCC speech that John Lewis delivered at the March on Washington. It's not just Cortland and Foreman having to change it in order for the march to go forward. It is also that initially there were people who put their hands on that. I had a discussion with P. Neal Joseph, who did Black Power and Stokely Carmichael book. Not as good as Thelwell's book, can I just mention? But But, I'm talking to him, and I see him on Book TV, and then I see him later, and I said, you made it seem like Stokely came up with this whole idea of Black Power. Hello. We were talking about that in staff meetings. Now, it's nice that, they give also some validity to Ricks, but it's not just Ricks and Stokely, right? The whole thing of women. Cortland said something, because we're about to do a thing on Monday with Teaching for Change around SNCC. And the fact that you see only men in the civil rights movement, when in fact, as Cortland said, in those early days, it was Ruby Doris who was running that organization. It wasn't just Foreman. It wasn't mainly Foreman. Now, when I come in, I see Foreman, right? Because he set up the photo department, and he set in the research department. But if you don't talk to the people who actually lived it and give them the voice, which we did in some ways, for example, in Eyes. And I'm glad you talked about how you carry your values and the values you learned in the movement through the rest of your life. So through all of your work, you do that. So when I'm doing, a 90-minute documentary on slave catchers, for example, and I say, no, it has to be slave catchers, slave resistors, and I have to fight with the History Channel on that, that's because I learned that in SNCC, right? I'm not coming out of that from the whole cloth. And the fact that you make sure that all the stories have that, and that you make sure that even back then, you see that the enslaved person is burned in the barn, and you do a recreation on that. All of that is important. I'm going to stop now. Okay.
Blessings, everybody. My name is Malu Brooks. I am a 10-year Dream Defender, a 2-time graduate of the Florida Agricultural and Mechanical University. And I'm just excited and blessed to be here with you all. A big thing for me is thinking about how do we tell the story of how we won is truly to tell the story of our journey. Dr. King says, I've made it to the mountaintop. The archivist will tell you, how did he get there? What route did he get to make it to that top of that mountain? Because it wasn't easy. And when we hear that speech, and so often we just think of like, all right, the mountaintop is here, we here, and it's like, no, how do we get there? And that's something we talked about a year ago of how organizing in itself is pretty ambiguous. They show the sittings, but they don't show the conversations and the debates around, should we even do this sit-in? So for me, a huge thing that I would like other people to understand about the work is that it exists. When I told people I was an archivist and they asked me what that meant, I told them I'm the guy in the basement of a library that no one talks to, that no one sees, and you really don't care about. But it made sense to them. It made sense to them. The problem is we're not in the basement anymore. All of this is online. It's all digitized now. FAMU was started by an African prince from Sierra Leone. And while I was doing my research on him, Thomas DeSalle Tucker, I went to the Black Archives at FAMU, and I couldn't get any information because everything they had on him was being digitized in that moment. So even the work we're doing is evolving. And I think that's the portrayal that has to evolve with it, that we're no longer just like armchair revolutionaries, but we're real guerrilla intellectuals. Like we're utilizing academia for our people. I think about Zimbabwe. They said when Zimbabwe got independence, like 3 people had college degrees. So if you don't know that, you don't understand the struggle that nation has to climb itself out of. And that's where our stories have to be told so we have a full understanding. And just to talk about the power of imagery and the power of archiving, I went to the Civil Rights Museum in Atlanta and I saw a picture of Ruby Doris. I didn't know anything about her, but her face, you know a real face when you see one. And it wasn't until I was able to talk to the SNCC elders that I got the real story of Ruby Doris. But if I don't have you, all I have is a face. So we're the ones that put a name to those faces.
Alafia, peace. I am Kafri Kuji Chakalia Biff. I'm a librarian by profession and came into kind of archival work because I was doing independent contracting and found working for my first organizing work, archiving organizing work with an organization called Kindred Spirits, Southern Justice for Kindred Spirits, and they're actually a woman-led organization that does work around reproductive justice. And having the opportunity to come in and work specifically with the New Georgia Project, there were some things, and how can we tell the story? I went in asking myself, how can I get these folks to help me make people understand how were they able to change Georgia purple? You know, because Georgia is a tough place to live, and it's a tough place for politics. And because it has so many counties. I think Georgia has the most counties in its state than any other state in the United States. And so things are really broken up politically in that way. But how do we tell the stories about how we won is really a great kind of, I didn't even know that's what I was doing, John. You know, but I do want to say that one of the questions that I asked the folks that were working at the New Georgia Project was, what would you want your grandchildren to know about the work you're doing right now? And that was kind of my emphasis for going in and sifting through the information and trying to gather a story there. It was about really how they were able to go in and do not just one, but have multiple satellite sites around the state of Georgia, and how they really got in the ground. I mean, real grassroots stuff, but how they used modern day technologies to do their work. One of the things about New Georgia Project is, you know, their electronic stuff, like they'll send out a tweet, and because they didn't want the enemy to know what they were doing, the tweet would only last virtually for minutes, and then it would disappear. And that's how a lot of their electronic things went out. It would go out, the constituents would get it, and then it would go away. Very hard to archive. Very difficult to try to archive that stuff. But it was amazing to actually be able to see in real time how they were engaging constituents across the state of Georgia. The other thing I do want to highlight about New Georgia Project is, as a librarian, I've always worked with women because it's a women-dominated field. But New Georgia Project is a women-led organization. I mean, I'm talking about from top to bottom, women-led organizations that are doing just powerful work, grassroots organizing, but also civic engagement. They would not have been able to turn the state purple if they had not raised the voter registration in the state of Georgia. And they were doing that by using the technology of today to get it done. I'll say no more.
Thank you all for getting us off to a good start, I think. So I guess the pressure's on me to ask a good question next. So I'll ask this one. And you all sort of talked a little bit about this. Why is it so important to effectively convey a history that matches your experience, and then develop the archives to support the telling of that history? Kafri, you just gave a couple of examples, but I wonder if others can give some examples as well.
And you said how the history matches our experience. One thing that Dream Defenders is doing now is we're going national. But we actually had an opportunity to go national many times. But I think one of the most pivotal times was in 2013, and I learned this from our archival process. But in 2013, when we went to Valdosta, Georgia, in terms of history, in Valdosta, Georgia, there was a young man, a high school student named Kendrick Johnson, who they found lifeless, wrapped up in a mat in their gym, in their school gym. They said he didn't have, it was a long story. It's a terrible story. But it was ruled like an accidental death, and no one was charged for this. So, and if you look at the way his body looked when they found him, he looked very similar to Emmett Till. So we go to Georgia, and what they need, you know, there's young people in Valdosta, what they need is a movement. So our goal is to help them build a movement, but the caveat is we're a statewide organization. I lived in Gainesville, Florida at the time, and we live closer to Valdosta than we are to Jacksonville or Tallahassee. But because we're statewide, we had to make that debate at that time, were we going to go national? So for me, looking at it now, hindsight is 20/20, but we're going national now because it's as necessary now as it was then. But we actually have the experience now that we didn't have then. And now moving forward, we're doing it with confidence, whereas if we would have went national then, it would have been a whirlwind.
Let me just say that, the experience matching the story and the archival process is a heavy question, first of all. But it really is about being able to, in real time, capture what movement is and what movement work is about, and actually finding spaces and finding places to actually gather those documents, right, to actually have the supporting documents. A lot of times when archivists come into a space, people don't know what archivists do, and people don't know what actually can be a part of an archive, right? People have things and they're basically going to discard them, or don't think they're worth anything, but to an archivist they really are. When you're trying to craft a story to tell about an organization or about any experience of things. And so I think that this was a groundbreaking opportunity for this kind of work to get started. But I hope this is not the end of it. I hope that something comes out of this work, this project, that can be kind of a national model for how we can go about capturing movement work at a larger scale.
I'll just go so quick, but actually I think Freedom Side and SNCC are the people who taught me this specific thing. It's not often in a current organizing project that you're so connected to a project that that is maintained in the present, but also has such iconic imagery and footage from its own, apex. And I think the thing in Freedom Side, I was one of the chief storytellers, and one of the things that we consciously did at all times was make the connection to SNCC aggressively in our imagery, in our communications, and SNCC actually makes that easy. And one of the things I think is important is it's an interplay between so many people. So it's an interplay between SNCC, because SNCC was giving, we're gonna stand in front of the bus with the arms locked together, singing, being beautiful and young and rebellious, right? Like, it's totally iconic. It's also an interplay between who is capturing that image. And like, a thing I've always wanted to ask and keep forgetting to ask when I see people is like, who's doing that? Like, now we hire a photographer to get those perfect photographs that depict us. But I think it was like the news at that time.
We had our own photo department.
Yeah, there you go. So it's the same. And then, we're putting those in social media graphics where we're literally recreating that exact image 50 years later. So there's power in both sort of like the passing of the torch piece of this, obviously, but then there's also power in the kind of let the circle be unbroken of it all, right? It hasn't ended. The young people are still being iconic and rebellious and powerful and amazing. And also, we are saying, it's the same shit. We're trying to do the same stuff. We're talking about the same stuff. We're doing the same things honestly, in many of the same places, right? So it's just, all of this is like an unspoken conversation that's living underneath this like social media graphics, like 1964, 2014. And I think that that's really critical. And I think, frankly, it was a huge part of our success, because it was clear to people what we were trying to do and be, because SNCC's history was so rich and so captured, and it allowed us to say we're part of that too. And it is part of this continuous struggle. And then now when I look back, and even as, we've been trying to gather the things to put into the archive, it's so crystal clear, and it's not often that in a super short campaign with a disparate number of people, you're able to just like completely solidify a message so obviously. And so a thing that actually really, really taught me that is so key is you have to constantly be thinking about the capture, the consumer, the message, but then also like what the artifact, what it is leaving afterwards, because that was like so inspirational to us. And we were like, so much of my movement education happened that summer because we were just like trying to consume everything there was possible about SNCC so that we could be like SNCC and do the stuff that SNCC did, and also be like, we're not gonna do that. They didn't do that right, you know? So I think that actually really changed the way that I literally thought about how to build movement campaigns and how to build movement messages so that we could be part of this kind of long struggle, continuous struggle, and really, really make that clear every single time that we were doing it. And it's something I've really tried to impart to the storytellers that I work with and train with now.
I think it took me a while to understand that archives weren't just memories, but that it was a way of proving that you were thinking about things in a certain way and doing things in a certain way. And so, you know, one of the things that SNCC Legacy Project has done, you know, thank you to Cortland and Charlie particularly for this, but that it establishes that thing, it's SNCC, who we were, what we did, but why we did it. And that's on all the sites. And I'm going to mention this because there were a couple of times, and I'm going to go back to Cortland and Jennifer and I are going to do this teacher session on Monday. And I have, since 1990, been taking with me as part of my packets, right, this Mississippi chronology. And it's a chronology of violence and intimidation in Mississippi 661. Now, I used to do it because I wanted to show that we understood from SNCC that police brutality and white supremacy was not just because one individual sheriff like Bull Connor or Governor Lyte Thompson hadn't had enough sensitivity training, right? It was because it was systemic. And so I would use it. I started this in 1990. It was part of my little packet, right? And I showed it, and you see Herbert Lee, you know, September 25th, Liberty, Amet County. Herbert Lee, a Negro who had been active in voter registration, was shot and killed by white state representative E.H. Hurst in downtown Liberty, Mississippi. Downtown. No prosecution was undertaken, the authorities explaining that the representative had shot in self-defense. Okay, so I have little tabs for things. I have something on Charlie, I have something, okay. All of this is in this, but we also had photos. So it allows me to say, and we did photos, so that you could see before digital cameras that, yeah, we really were beaten. And sometimes it had nothing to do with whether anybody was involved in the movement, right? It was because it's random violence. Because from the time we got here, it's always been, it's not just because you did a particular thing they didn't like, it's just, I want to show you I got the power and I can kill you if I want to. So that's what this was about. And I could show this north and south at campuses. They would understand that. Part of my archives that's here has what I wrote in the 1964, when we're going into Mississippi for Freedom Summer, right? And even staff had to fill out an application. So I have this application, and the top of it, and the copy is here, says, it has the person that who should be contacted if something happens to you. So I have at the top of this application, contact my sister. Do not contact my mother, right? Because my thing is, if anything happens to me, it's my sister who needs to tell my mother, it's not you, okay? So, but all of that is part of the story right now. Let me just mention one other thing, which is, when we're doing Eyes on the Prize, that first series, I was working at the United Church of Christ Commission for Racial Justice that had been started by Charlie's daddy. And it was this big agency at the United Church, so I'm the director of information. But I'm also going back and forth to Eyes on the Prize, the first series. And the producer for the Montgomery segment, I'm saying to her, because I was the researcher on the project, and serious stuff. Anyway, I said, you know, it's important to understand that King is going into an already organized black community. And she said, we have nothing to substantiate that. Okay. Now, and it's the same thing I ran up against when I said to Henry Hampton, when we're doing the Lowndes County story that I had proposed for Eyes 2 and got in. And I say to him, oh yeah, you know, we're building an all-black political party. No, you weren't, he says to me. I'm sitting he's in the edit room. It's the the two producers, and I see the footage because they're doing that segment on the Steam, wasn't Steam back, that was Eyes One, on the edit facility. And I say, oh, I see the footage, and I say, oh, Henry, that was an all-black political party. He says, no. I said, yeah, it was. And he says, no, it wasn't. And he does this thing, because he used to do that when he got pissed. And I said, yeah, it was. I was there. Duh. Oh, he got so mad. And I realized I had crossed the line for him, right? I've now gone from filmmaker to participant. I said, just ask Mance. Ask Bob Mance. I didn't have, your name is Hassan. I didn't have Hassan's book. If I had had Hassan's book, I could have pointed to it. He hadn't written it yet. Okay, but on Montgomery, I'm now arguing with the producer for the Montgomery segment. And I said, yeah, it really was organized. She's saying, well, we have nothing, because nothing had been written yet, right? What's her name, who did the not redistribution of economic power, the revolutionary Rosa Parks. Yeah, that's right, Jean Theo Harris. Okay, she hadn't written the book. There were a lot of things that hadn't been done yet. Okay, so, because this is 1986, 87. I say, yeah, so somebody, and I can't remember who it was, says, there are cards at the Schomburg, because somebody was doing an early dissertation, and they were basing it on the black press at that time. So I go up, and I look at these cards, and I find that, in fact, there's the Alabama Tribune, and there are some other things, but there aren't cards, because they haven't been digitized, right? And I then get all these things, it's not just the Women's Political Council, it's the Voters League. There are like 25 black organizations, some of which are sorority and fraternity, some of which are just social clubs. That's all but they're organized. Even if it's not around struggle, they're organized. So I take all this information. We have two different lines in that Montgomery segment that says, and it's a highly organized black community. But it's because I found it in the archives in the Schomburg, because somebody bothered to put them in the archives. Okay, I'm gonna stop now. Okay.
I'm gonna pause for just a minute with a commercial break. I don't know if you realize this, but we're trying to inception everybody in the room to focus on their archives. Have you? Okay. Now to our back to our regularly scheduled program. So I think we've got about 15 minutes left, so we have 5 questions. We've only gotten to 2, so that's how good this panel is. What are some of the ways, and you all talked a little bit about this, but I want to dig a little bit deeper into this. What are some of the ways that you, other activists, archivists, and historians can help capture the stories of people on the ground to make sure that their stories become part of history and in a way that feels truthful to the participants and that others will find useful as they interact with this history? Now, I'll say, and I'm not on the panel, but I'm just going to say it. It's interesting that Jess started off by making the comment that organizing work comes across as boring, because archival work comes across as boring too. We are not sexy at all. I always, when I explain what an archivist is to people, I say we're like the redheaded stepchild of public memory work, because most people know what a library is, and most people know what a museum is. But if you tell them I work in an archive, they go, well, I don't really, because we're always where? In the basement, right. So the question is, how do we help capture the stories of the people on the ground to make sure that their stories become part of history, that it's no longer this top-heavy narrative in a way that feels truthful to the participants?
Oh my gosh, I have so many thoughts about this. I mean, I think the first thing is we need to frame our folks in a historical, like, as worthy of the history that they are making, Like, find a good backdrop, dog. Like, make sure people look like they're ready to be put on camera. Do you know what I mean? And I don't mean like, are they beautiful? I just mean like, well, are they wearing a white shirt, and are they sweaty, and are they hard to hear? Like, I truly, like the mechanics are like really important actually, because that matters for whether or not people can hear your message. And so we have to think about what if we want people to hear, we got to make that the most powerful thing in what's going on. And I think like sometimes we just like don't have the basics. Part of the reason I say that is I actually, in my experience, I have found they're looking for us to give, like the news media is looking for us to give them that stuff, and we're just not always giving it. Now, they're also, in the absence of our content that we own and make, gonna make their own narrative. We know that. And then what we're doing is spending time correcting the record and being on defense instead of putting out our message, which are not the same things. And so that's why I'm like so focused on like, okay, what are we creating? What are we giving? How are we framing? But I do think a lot, and again, like Snick taught me this, you know, when you're doing the work, you're not like, we are making a historical movement and these are the civil rights leaders. You're just like, you know, I'm rolling with my friends. And I think in particular in Freedom Side, I used to think about this all the time because like, you know, Nell was like putting her rent money up for the hotel and we were making peanut butter jelly sandwiches and we were sleeping like 10 to a room. So like it really did not feel like we're making history together. Did not feel like that at all. So and like, you know, such as movements, right? So I think that it can feel like grandiose or self-aggrandizing or not appropriate to do that. And I actually just think we gotta like kind of work through that a little bit together and get more clear about the why we're doing those things, because if we thought about the things that we were creating as what we are offering to the historical record about what we're trying to do, I think it would just completely change the way that we approach that work. And just because we haven't talked about it enough, I think, you know, this is especially critical in the digital age, and we're really only at the beginning of the digital age, frankly. Like AI and movements is something we haven't even touched on in our movements enough. And like, imagine a world when like people can write the I have a dream speech via chat GPT. You know, like it's just like, we should be afraid. We should be afraid. I don't care what Austin says. Where's Austin? We should be afraid. Or like, I don't know, maybe we'll write better speeches, but I'm not sure that they'll have the heart inside them and the praxis underneath them that, in fact, I know they will not, that we need. So in the digital age, there's like an even second piece, which I do not think you all were contending with in the same way, which is there's a constant feedback loop. So the minute you put something out, somebody is responding to you and also like saying stuff about you as an individual in addition to the ideas that you're trying to put forward. And so that is, I think, also a tension, which is like, how are we inviting response? And then also, how are we figuring out how to respond in some way? Because that is the site of organization in some ways. That is the place that you're having, like, you know, instead of, or maybe in addition to staying up till like 11 o'clock at night and really like debating, you know, what's going down, you're also like debating it on Twitter. And let me just tell you, Twitter is not a good, or X is not, it's not a good place to have those debates, right? It's actually quite difficult to put something in 180 characters that works with our 6 hours of combos over drinks. Like, it's just not the same. So that takes both skill and also like a real clear sense of strategy of what you're trying to put forward to be able to do that. And all of us actually have to get good at that, because like, you know, there were good pictures for us to take from to connect ourselves to. And I just don't want the movements of the future to be like, okay, the way to organize is to like take a picture of a lot of people in a conference room on laptops. You know, it's just like, I don't really want to be the part of that GBH. So that's like something I'm really, really thinking about all the time. And I'm also thinking about, okay, and then also, if we have so much content and conversation, what's the way to help the best, or maybe the most strategic, rise to the top? Both in our work and then also, of course, in the archive. Because not all content is created equal, and it's really important that not only the best content be owned and come out of the movement, but also that content be the things that we're culling aside to make sure that's what's left as our powerful archive. And I'm just beginning to think about our sort of like movement archive in that way, but I just don't think that's like a skill that we have yet in the movement, and something we're gonna have to build for sure.
I quite simply think that archivists need to do a better job of coming out of the basement and letting people know who we are and what we do. You know, we you know, it's you know, and that's really it. We have to, and whether that's by, you know, even this project, writing more about it and getting more about it known on the national level, so that people have an opportunity to understand kind of what happened here and what's happening, so that they can say, oh, this is a great kind of thing that they're doing. It's a cool thing that they're doing, and hey, maybe we need to reach out and find archivists in our local community to archive what we're doing. You know, and I think that for me, that's it. We really have to find a way to promote ourselves and get people to know what archivists are, what we do, and how we can help inform future generations by helping on the ground grassroots organization, or even, you know, or just organizing movement, period, to be able to have a sustainable record of the work.
And as an anthropologist, you know, I place a large value on people. And so for us as archivists, we got to be able to see what's happening, and we got to have a value in it, right? For a quick example, when I was in Sierra Leone, West Africa, I was doing research on the college students there. These college students are worried about eating their next meal. They're worried about making sure they pass their class, and they got partner problems. Meanwhile, I'm like that fly on the wall that's looking at them like, y'all are the foundation generation. Like, but I see it. It's my job to highlight it for them. And to give a perfect example, we were on a call one day with Leah, and Carfree mentions the Trap Museum in Atlanta. The Trap Museum, for you all that don't know, is a museum all around the history of like trap music and Southern music as a whole. It's a pink house. And Carfree, being a man of his word, went to the Trap Museum and asked them, hey, this is beautiful. I love what you're doing. Who's archiving this for you all? They didn't know anything about it. So us actually coming out the basement and hitting the streets, with Carver's example for the Trap Museum, it's happening everywhere. There's a Buffalo Soldier Museum in Houston. We're everywhere. You know, there's all kind of Black history in St. Augustine, Florida, Pensacola. So we got to train people, though. I'm an anthropologist. I'm a historian. I didn't know about archivists until I was brought into this process, until I was brought into this fold. So we just got to raise more awareness, and a big part of that is highlighting the importance of having it.
And I no longer remember the question, but I'm going to answer what I think was okay. Because I've been so interested. Yes, right. You know, I think part of it is also making sure that the people who are doing the work get to tell the story. And a group of us, 6 women, SNCC women, decided we were going to do a book. And it's called Hands on the Freedom Plow, Personal Accounts by Women at SNCC. Now, it took us 15 years.
Don't worry.
Oh God, honey, it's 800 pages.
We did pass that around in Freedom Side.
Did you really?
Absolutely.
Oh my goodness.
Absolutely.
Well,
Because we didn't feel enough that we were seeing women's
Yes.
contributions. And
That's
so it
it.
was like they literally wrote a book
It's
to fix that problem.
That's it. And in their own voices. See, that's the thing. Now, Eyes on the Prize it's basically a good story well told by the people who live those experiences. That's what Eyes on the Prize is. But we selected who told it and what part they told, right? And what story we were going to select. And those stories had to have footage with them because we didn't do recreation. So that's on Hands, we just sent the blanket out to all the women that we knew, and we said, write it. If you can't write it, then we'll send somebody to talk to you. So we bring Annie Pearl Avery up. Dottie does her story over 2 days, transcribes it, then it gets edited. Now, it wasn't easy because we were not all on the same page, not all on the same page. And so we almost broke up. But what we kept in the back of our mind, the reason that we didn't basically kill each other was because we kept saying, this is too important to finish. Mm-hmm. This project we have got to stick with. So we finally, it got done. But it's mainly, the other thing I would say, and this is again from the film part, that it's important that the people who do it get to say it. but also that you get the people who most represent that struggle. So, for example, when we were doing on Eyes on the Prize, we're doing the Detroit Rebellion story, right? And the footage usually shows black folks who are kind of halfway drunk. They have no reason why they're going into the stores. And so that's the footage. And the first screening that we did with advisors, which included, Vince Harding and a number of other people. And as a matter of fact, I'm pretty sure it was Selwell who said, they show it, and it's the Detroit Rebellion. And a lot of it, as I said, is footage of, people, throwing bricks in the stores and whatever. And either Thelwell or Vince Harding said, you need to question the role of the footage and what interpretation people are going to get from that, right? Now, that may have been the only footage that we saw at that time, but what it meant was we need to go out and see other footage. We need to look for it. We need to make sure that that does not become the story. And I find that I constantly have to do that on films. You always have to put in resistance. You always have to have stories of this. You always have, because what you're doing is fighting against the general narrative, which is, no, I won't. No, yeah, it is. The general narrative is what, you get from enslavement, right? Which is, we're not smart enough. It takes white people to do things. It's the normal narrative that you get, right? So you are constantly fighting against that, and you can do it by telling it through the stories of people who you think should tell that story. Not just because they're in the organization or whatever, because they will give you the real story from, Anyway, okay. Yep, okay.
Judy, as soon as you stopped talking, my alarm went off. So
Look at that.
we are right on time. I want to thank our panel. We will be right back up here to have a group conversation about what was discussed. So I'm sure many things that were said resonated with folks in the room. We're going to turn the microphone back on to you for you all to respond and share what moved you, how to add to the dialogue. We're going to take a 15-minute break, come back at about 10:30, and then start that part of the morning. Does anybody have any questions about anything? Okay. See y'all in 15 minutes.